Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us in this special Epsom electorate virtual public meeting. I'm coming to you from here in Parliament, and we have two special guests joining us. One of them is Andrew Allen. He's the Executive General Manager of Service Delivery at Auckland Transport, and the other is Shane Ellison, the Chief Executive of Auckland Transport. The topic is the Safer Speeds program and the proposal to limit speed limits in large areas of Auckland, I think it's fair to say, and particularly in the Epsom electorate. It's mainly two areas, an area, a significant portion of the Mount Eden area between Dominion, Balmoral and Mount Eden roads next to the village, and also a smaller area, but nevertheless a significant area for people who live there in Parnell. So we're going to have a discussion about why Auckland Transport is proposing to do this, what benefits it sees from doing so, and how people can consult or at least have their say, or what consultation has been done to date. The purpose of a meeting like this is to try and help people understand what is going on, why and how they can influence it in their community. I have to say the job that Auckland Transport has is a challenging one, for the simple reason that transport networks, by definition, are things that people share and have different views on how they should be used. Tonight's topic is no exception to that, because the question is simply how fast should you be able to go on certain roads? And in the Epsom electorate, where we have 30 schools in just 20 square kilometres, we're highly focused on education, we're highly focused on the well-being of children, and we have to give a lot of time and thought to any proposal that might make it safer for children to be in our community. At the same time, we're also an electorate of people that are going places and often have extremely busy lives and need to get around, and it can seem almost comical to have to drive 30 kilometres an hour as you do in parts of the CBD already. To try and reconcile those, we hope that we're going to hear from Shane and Andrew from Auckland Transport, what some of the thinking is, what the evidence they've drawn on, what their goals are, and how they've come to the conclusion that these roads should have their speeds reduced, and what that will mean for people. That's the hope of this discussion. It's also unavoidable, I suspect, that some people will want to talk about the separate proposal, but for the same area, which is that major corridors such as Mount Eden and Monaco Road should have parking removed so that they become more useful as transport corridors, but perhaps less useful for people who want to park their car outside their house or outside a shop, or people who operate those shops and rely on people parking their cars. Now, in fairness to Shane and Andrew, they weren't asked to come on for that topic. They have agreed that at a very high level they will address it, and also stress that they're happy to have another meeting with the people that specialise in that area from Auckland Transport, rather than bog down this meeting that we agreed to have about speed limits. We've got around about 35-40 minutes from here. I've got a lot of questions that people have already sent in, so I'll be looking to ask those questions and have a kind of discussion. But first we're going to have a discussion, a presentation rather, first a video, and then a bit of a talk explaining the initiative from Shane, and then Andrew, who is more the specialist in this area, being the Executive Director of Service Delivery for AT. Shane's someone that I've known for a while. I'm sure he won't mind me saying that he is a resident of the Epsom electorate, and I know that he has worked extremely hard over the past 3 or 4 years that he's been the Chief Executive at what is a difficult job that often leads to a lot of conflict. I particularly want to thank Shane for making himself available after hours to do this special presentation. Andrew, I haven't known for as long, but nevertheless is another highly capable and devoted person who is doing very good work and doing his best to make sure that the various conflicts that arise from the use of transport networks can be resolved, giving us a safe and efficient way to get around the city. So that's enough introduction from me. Without further ado, from both Shane Ellison and Andrew Allen, we have a short video presented by Auckland Transport as an introduction to the Safer Speeds program and what they're trying to achieve by changing speed limits in our community. And following that, we'll give the floor to Shane, who will have a bit more to say.
Auckland, we have a problem on our roads. Hundreds of our mokopuna and tamariki are living with life-changing injuries due to serious crashes on our region's roads. Too many are losing their lives. Major crashes on our region's roads have devastating consequences for whānau, friends and communities. And while it's true that people make mistakes on our roads every day, those mistakes can easily lead to death or serious injury. But they don't have to. Weather and vehicle conditions also play their part in road incidents, but regardless of our driving skills, it is the speed at which our vehicle is travelling that dictates whether people will walk away from the crash or are carried away. If we get hit by a car at 50 kilometers an hour, the chances of us dying are 4 to 5 times higher than if we were hit at 30 kilometers an hour. If our car hits someone at 30 kilometers an hour, the chance of dying is just 10%. So safe speeds can reduce the likelihood of a crash and the potential for serious injuries. Because we are human and we make mistakes, collisions will still happen. But we are working very hard to make these collisions survivable by setting safe speed limits, because no death or serious injury should be acceptable.
Okay, welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're here to talk about Safer Speed program and changes to speed limits in the Epsom electorate, particularly Mount Eden and Parnell. And we're welcoming Shane Ellison, the Chief Executive of Auckland Transport. That was a short video from Auckland Transport about the program. Shane.
Thanks, David. Pomaria, good evening, everyone. Great to be here. And David, thanks for the opportunity once again. I think it's the third time I've had the opportunity of you, or you've invited me along to a session like this. So great to be able to talk to some of your constituents in the Epsom electorate. Hey, I have got Andrew Allen with me tonight, and Andrew's the executive responsible for our Safe Speeds program. And along with what I'll talk about, Andrew will talk to the specifics of proposals for Mount Eden and for Parnell. And as you said, David, I live in the Epsom electorate. I'm actually live in Parnell, and my son's at Parnell District School. And so even more reason for Andrew to speak about this, given the potential conflict of interest that I have. And so I stay right away from any decision making around that. But tonight, look, we've got a very short presentation. We want to leave as much time as possible for questions and to engage. But what we're going to do with the slides is talk about why we're doing the speed limits or reviewing speed limits in Auckland, give a high-level view of the program in Auckland and where it's at, and what we're hearing from Aucklanders and give you some early results from what we've seen since June 2020. As I say, I'll hand over to Andrew to talk about Mount Eden and Parnell. So what I'll do is I'll start sharing some slides and just talk to those. I'll work through them fairly quickly. David, you summed it up really well. We do have trade-offs we have to make every day in terms of what we do with the transport system. So look, I'll get started with some of these slides. Just give me a few seconds and I'll pull those up. Okay. Hopefully we can all see that, and it's all clear for everyone. So why are we doing the Safe Speeds program? Well, there are two basic reasons. First of all, in 2017, when Simon Bridges was Transport Minister, he brought into, or he approved, the setting of speed limits rule. And what it means is that road controlling authorities across New Zealand, of which Auckland Transport is one, have an obligation to review speed limits for which they are responsible. And they have to review them to ensure that they are both safe and appropriate. So not just safe and not just appropriate, but safe and appropriate. And so when you think about appropriate, and a lot of this is set out in detail in the speed limits guide, we have to think about efficiency and effectiveness of the network. So people like Andrew's team worked through that. There was a clear process that they worked through and come up with proposals as part of that review process. But the important thing to note is that if we don't find that the speed limits for roads are safe and appropriate, then we don't have an option to do nothing and just leave it as it is. We actually have to either review the speed limit or put in place engineering changes to make the speed limit safe. So that's the first reason why we have embarked on the Safe Speeds program. The second reason is that, quite frankly, we got to 2017, and you'll see on that graph that very high blue bar. And in Auckland for that calendar year, we had 832 deaths or serious injuries on Auckland's roads. So it was about 64 deaths and just under 800 serious injuries. So that's kind of the order of 15 or 16 deaths and serious injuries on Auckland's roads every week. And that had been climbing significantly since about 2013. You'll see since 2017, we've been making inroads, which is great. But nevertheless, in Auckland, our performance is poor. And that is not just limited to Auckland. It is applies to New Zealand. And I'll show you a graph in a moment that sets that out. If we think about it in economic terms, that 832 deaths and serious injuries was costing Auckland in socio-economic terms $1.3 billion. And that's the costs on the health system, the cost to families, the economic costs, everything wrapped in there. So really significant, and matched the actual cost that Auckland was incurring as a result of congestion. As I said, New Zealand's performance is poor. And you'll see there in that graph on the right a list of OECD countries. And what it sets out is the number of road fatalities per billion vehicle kilometres travelled. And you'll see that New Zealand is well behind much of the rest of the world, and probably a comparator that kind of resonates with most people will be the Australian one. And clearly we are well behind Australia in terms of our performance. Recently, we've had a couple of road safety business improvement reviews done by an international expert from Australia, Eric Howard. And basically, Eric called out that if we were as good as Victoria in Australia, New Zealand would have had 124 fewer deaths on its road in each of the last 3 years. So quite significant, and big performance gap that we're trying to improve across New Zealand. So quickly, if I move into the Safe Speeds program. The Safe Speeds program really kicked off in 2019, after that 2017 year, that annus horribilis of a year. And we went through a special consultative process after doing assessments and having our reviews of speeds independently peer reviewed. And in October 2019, the Auckland Transport Board approved change to speed limits on 11% of the road network. Much of that was in rural areas, Franklin and Rodney, but there are also, as many of you will be on this call will be aware, some changes in the city centre and also some town centres as well, Mission Bay and St Heliers among them. Phase 2, as you'll see there on the graphic, again was consulted upon late last year and was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, again approved by our board. And some of those changes will start to come into effect in about 2 to 3 months' time. The third tranche, which is most relevant to tonight, which Andrew will talk about, including Mount Eden and Parnell, has been or is being in the process of being consulted upon. The most significant changes in the last two tranches were, as David has set it out, a much greater focus around schools, marae, and other community facilities. I think probably the biggest thing we'd call out in phases 1, 2 and 3 is that our efforts have been on Auckland's highest risk roads. And when I say highest risk, those that have had the highest levels of deaths and serious injuries, plus those that have been through a risk assessment, which show that those roads are indeed high risk. The next phases, which will kick off 2023 to 2026, as part of that obligation I talked about before, we'll look to do another 30 to 40% or review 30 to 40% of the network. Doesn't mean necessarily that will result in speed limit changes, just says they are reviews that we have to work through over that time. Really important thing for us, we have been through public consultation. Under the Local Government Act, we're required to do that. Public consultation has been extremely valuable. In the first tranche or the first stage first phase I talked about, we had over 11,000 submissions. The second tranche, we've had over 8,000 submissions, so high levels of interest from Aucklanders in the speed limits program. You'll see there some of the things that some of the feedback that we've had from Aucklanders around the program. In each case, we've made changes to the final, to what we originally went out to consultation with, and the final, what's been approved by the board, looks slightly different in some cases based on what we're hearing. We're also, consultation by its nature is really valuable, but it doesn't necessarily give us the full representative view of Aucklanders. And so we have commissioned independent surveys of the views of Aucklanders. And not surprisingly, it tells us that Aucklanders are very supportive on high-risk roads around schools, early childhood centres, retirement villages, all those sorts of areas. So really key for us to hear the view of all Aucklanders as well as the consultation results. So a lot of the questions that we get is the program actually working? And you'll see on that slide some kind of the results we're seeing after 18 months of stage 1 or phase 1. Really important caveat that I put on this data though is that we, Andrew and his team and us at AT and others that are experts in this area, we like to look for 5 years worth of data before we make any kind of committed judgment about the success of programs such as this. But what we can see so far is that while in 2021 on roads that we haven't looked at changing in terms of speed limits, deaths have increased. On the roads, the 10% of roads where we did review speed limits, the number of deaths has reduced by 47%. So Andrew, why don't I hand over to you and you can talk a little bit about the areas of interest, particularly for those probably on this event this evening.
Kia ora. Thank you, Shane. And just echo your sentiment, great to be here and have an opportunity to speak to our Safer Speeds program. I won't spend too long. I've only got 2 slides I'd like to cover off. I'm probably preaching a little to the converted here about what the changes we're proposing cover. In essence, you can see from the maps in front of you there that we're focusing on roads to the north of Parnell School, and also a good cluster of roads around Mount Eden Normal Primary, and also focusing on some parts of Dominion and Ian McKinnon Drive. You'll get the sense from those 2 maps that a lot of our focus is around schools, and we've had a lot of feedback through the survey work we've done and the working with communities that has indicated to us that there's a high degree of support for speed management changes around schools, mostly because we have the demographic that David referred to earlier. We have our children that we encourage to take active modes where possible to get to and from school, and we want to make sure that those areas are safe areas for them to get to and from their place of residence through to obviously the school and back home. So one of the things that we have learned, and you'll see it in the maps, the blue areas are the roads on which we are proposing changes, and those blue dotted lines, we're proposing changes from 50 kilometers per hour down to 30 kilometers per hour. And you can just see on the bottom map, top left kind of corner, there's a bit of a green dotted line. That is an area of road where we're proposing to move from 60 down to 50 kilometers per hour. The other thing you'll pick up from these maps is that many of the changes, particularly the 30K changes, you'll see they're quite clustered. They're around the school zones by and large. And that's something that we've learnt over the previous two tranches of speed work that we've done, phases 1 and 2. When we started off with phase 1, we very much targeted just those roads that had the highest risk profiles, as Shane has alluded to. But we've learned very quickly through feedback that some issues were created with that. When you don't treat areas as a more holistic grouping, you tend to end up with the potential for rat running and people trying to avoid the 30K roads and traveling on other roads. So we've learned that treating areas as a little more holistically, if you like, area-based approach seems to work a lot better and delivers a lot better result. And that's what we're kind of carrying into this phase of speed management, and also carrying through into the next phase that Shane alluded to. So I won't dwell any more on that slide. I might jump across to the final slide. And really the last slide, which I don't think is up yet, the last slide really just covers off some of the way in which we will engage with communities when we make the decisions about speed limit changes. And you'll see that particularly when we're working around schools, but in areas where we've got these lower speed limits that we are proposing, we work with all parts of the community to make sure that the changes are well informed, and that we help people to be as compliant and aware of the changes as is humanly possible, so that we can actually get the right outcomes. It's got nothing to do with enforcement and fines or revenue. We actually want people to be able to travel at these speed limits, which we consider to be safe and appropriate, because it delivers a great outcome for everyone, to be frank. So we work with schools and principals and teachers, helping them to try and understand why it is that we need the changes, or proposing the changes that we're looking to implement. We work with communities in those areas to make sure they're very well aware of the changes, so they don't come across as a surprise or a bit of an ambush. And yeah, we basically try to make sure that people are well aware of the change once decisions have been made, so that they can adopt the appropriate behaviour when those changes come into effect. And I think that probably wraps up our presentation quite well. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions and answers and a discussion. So thank you very much for your time and patience. And David, we might hand back to you.
Two years into a pandemic, it happens to all of us. Look, if you've just joined us, we're here doing an Epsom Electorate Community Zoom. Shane Ellison, Chief Executive of Auckland Transport, and Andrew Allen, Director of Service Delivery at AT. And we're talking about the Safer Speeds program, the proposal that will see quite a lot of Mount Eden and Eastern Parnell have the speed limits on the roads changed in order that the streets become safer. Obviously, there's a lot of community interest, and we've had quite a lot of questions sent in. Before we go too much further, can we just recap the actual process? So there's been a consultation over the past several months. It's now closed, as I understand it, this month, and final decision making is in August. So can you give a sense of what happens? Who's involved? And is it the AT board? Is it you guys? Is it the council? Is it the Albert Eden local board or the Ōrākei local board? Who's involved in this from here?
Andrew, do you want to talk through the detail? Because I think it's quite important that you just talk through how we assess the feedback and what your team does with it technically.
Yeah, sure. Let me speak to that. Quite a bit of time to elapse between now and August, when we eventually will take a decision paper to the board, who will make the final decision about the bylaw, David, in terms of your question. But between now and then, we've got to, of course, gather and analyse all of the substantive feedback that we will have gleaned through the consultation process. And in all honesty, if the last two phases of speed management changes are anything to go by, we're typically ending up with submissions in the magnitude of the order of about 1,000 different responses that we've got to work through, sometimes even more. The team go through all of the feedback we get, every single piece of feedback. They leave no stone unturned. They will look at what people are saying on a road-by-road basis. A lot of the feedback that we get from people is very unique and specific to the road, typically the road close to where they live or a road which they frequently travel. And so the team will take all of that road-by-road feedback and they will check that against the data we have. In some instances, they will pick up and glean information that we may not have been aware of. If that happens, the team will go out and validate some of the data that we've gathered in terms of the technical assessments Shane alluded to earlier. So huge amount of work goes into establishing what we believe to be the safe and appropriate speed before we go out to consultation. But sometimes we learn something through the consultation. In fact, regularly we learn stuff through consultation. That means we need to go and double check, make sure that we have things right. In some instances, it means that we might modify or change our position. In other instances, we're simply validating that although we've heard this, we're validating that we've got the facts and the evidence right, and we haven't missed a trick or an issue. So that analysis takes quite a bit of time to go through. It all gets grouped into kind of thematic themes, and we produce a document, a communications document that can be released to members of the public so that they can get a view on how their feedback's been interpreted and what our response is against each and every piece of feedback that we got. So a huge parcel of work to be done working our way through that consultation process before we're in a position to take a recommendation to our board as to what the final decision or outcome might be.
I think that's really helpful for people to know. I'm sure a lot of people watching this are people who will have made submissions. So it's helpful to know that that's your process, and ultimately around August, the board of AT gets a decision paper and decides whether or not to approve these proposed speed limit changes. So that's the process. I guess there's also an opportunity to answer some of the questions. As I said, people have sent in questions, and thank you. We've actually got about 4 pages worth, and I won't be able to ask each one, but thankfully a lot of them are kind of unified in what they say. And I think I can probably summarize them in that there appears to be a kind of bluntness about the initiative. Now, I heard what Andrew said earlier, that you can't simply make it one street because people will just drive around that street. And so there's a logic to having quite a wide area with the same speed limit so that you don't just channel a whole lot of traffic off to some other street, which then becomes perhaps more congested and dangerous. Understand that. Understand that it's a statutory requirement to assess the speed limits on streets to see if they're safe, and understand that there was a bad year in 2017, in fact, a couple of bad years around then that you're responding to. But what is, I think, something people want to understand is, first of all, are we sure that speed is the issue? Because there appear to be other behaviours. I think there was one person that really summed it up, and I'll just read it out. It's quite a candid one. Do you for one moment think that a drugged driver or someone in a stolen car or some idiot racing is going to pay any attention to a posted 30-kilometre speed limit or an 80-kilometre-hour speed limit? With these situations already known the real cause of road accidents/deaths, what are you going to do about that? That's a good, forthright question. Thank you very much, whoever sent that in. And I think it's a valid point. You've told us that people die on Auckland roads. But are we sure it's because of speed? And second of all, I guess it's certainly true. Auckland is a vast city. It must be one of the biggest cities in the world in terms of having one council. And you go up to places like Rodney, you've got windy country roads. You can imagine how there might be a death toll there. But thankfully, we very rarely see people dying in the streets of Mount Eden. And if we do, you have to wonder if there wasn't some other factor at fault. So I guess around this question of bluntness, can we be sure that we're on the right track, that it is truly speed-related deaths on these roads rather than deaths that may be speed-related but on other roads, or deaths and serious injuries on these roads that may have causes other than speed?
Andrew, do you want to talk to the slide that we were talking about a bit earlier?
Yeah, I'd love to do that if I could, Shane. David, in response, the first thing I would say, there's been some research done fairly recently around the extent to which speed is a contributing factor on crashes in New Zealand. And the first thing I would say is that what that evidence has revealed is that in 70% of the crashes that occur in New Zealand and in Auckland, speed is a factor. So it's not the only factor, but it is absolutely a contributing factor to the fact that that crash occurred in the first place, and also a contributing factor to the severity of the outcome as a result of that incident. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd like to share, if I could, and I'll just have a go at trying to quickly pull up a slide, hopefully with some success. It's quite a revealing slide. So I'll just share my screen here. Right.
We could be patient.
Sorry.
I'll just give you a second. I'll just ask another question while you're bringing it up, if it's okay. It's a simple one. Somebody, and this might be for Shane, somebody asked, are there any proposals for Remuera, which is the biggest suburb, geographically at least, in Epsom? And we'll just give Andrew a little bit of time if he's having a technology problem. Because people in the Remuera suburb have noticed that they don't seem to be part of this phase or tranche, but they wonder about future ones.
Yeah, look, good question. So to date, there has been there's nothing in the current proposals. So the one tranche, stage 3, that we've just been out to consultation on. But in late 21, we consulted on a proposal for 30 km/h permanent speed zones around Dilworth and Dio schools for girls. You'll all be familiar with that. And also around Remuera Primary, with those changes gaining good support through consultation. While we're still working through, there are over 200 schools in Auckland, and you mentioned the number in Epsom, David. We do expect to see proposals in the future for further speed limits around some schools in Remuera. And I did have a list, but I think it was the likes of Marcelin College, Onehunga College might be just outside of Epsom. Not sure. You'll know it better, David.
No, that's not quite in the Epsom electorate, but yeah.
So One Tree Hill College. And Coed Terrace School. So you can expect, particularly around schools, to see proposals from us in the coming years.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. How's Andrew going? I know that. So basically, the answer is nothing for Remuera planned, except maybe immediately around schools. How are you going, Andrew, with the technology?
David, I'm going to abandon ship on trying to bring the slide up, but I will nevertheless share the insights with you because I have the information in front of me. And the slide I was looking to share is it's a bit of a myth buster. It's a slide with some facts on it, not speculation, facts that are based on research into crashes in Auckland over the last 5 years, well, not the last 5 years, over a 5-year period, I should be clear on. And I just want to clarify, because a lot of people do think, and the way that question was articulated is the kind of person who's been drinking and out for a bit of a hoon after a few drinks is not going to pay attention to the 30k speed sign. That's probably right, to be frank. But let's actually understand the makeup of a typical crash in Auckland. When do crashes in Auckland actually happen? Well, the evidence tells us that the most likely time that you could be involved in a crash in Auckland is between 3 and 6 p.m. on a weekday. So a crash, a death or serious injury crash, between 3 and 6 p.m. on a weekday, not a weekend, not at 1 in the morning, 3 and 6, when most of us are traveling probably either to or from work in that kind of peak period. So that's the first fact I'd like to share. The second one, 2 out of 3 crashes that occur on our network are caused by a system failure, not reckless behavior. So that's 66 odd % where the crash is occurring and happening to somebody who is trying to do the right thing. They've had a momentary lapse.
Sorry to interrupt, but what's a system failure?
So a system failure is essentially where one of the parts of our safety system, be it the road and the infrastructure, be it the speed limit, be it the police and the enforcement component, be it the star rating and the way in which we certify the safety of our vehicle fleet in New Zealand. It's the system is the way in which all of the elements that keep us safe when we travel around in our cars come together to deliver a safer outcome for an individual. So what we're saying here is that it is not reckless behavior that's creating the vast majority of crashes on our network. It is people who have got suffering a momentary lapse in concentration, or an event beyond their control takes over. A possum runs out in front of the road, a cyclist veers around a car door. These are what I would term system failures. They are not aberrant or reckless behavior. Somebody having a drink late at night, hopping into the car, driving at high speed, regardless of whatever the speed limit is. No doubt there are those people, but I want to reinforce that 2/3 of the accidents, the death and serious injury accidents we see on our network, is not that aberrant behavior, as per the question that was asked. And then the final thing I would say about learnings around accidents on our roads is the vast majority of them. So when I say vast majority, 58% of the accidents that happen on Auckland roads happen on our 50k arterial roads. 58% happen on our 50k local roads, arterial roads. And 62% of those accidents happen within 11 kilometers of your home address. So if that puts it into kind of perspective for you, typically you're going to be involved in an accident between 3 and 6 on a weekday within 11 kilometers of your home on a 50k road. It's not likely to be somebody having a good drink, perhaps too much over the limit, and hopping in a car.
I think we take your point, and that those are statistics that might seem counterintuitive, that at least 2/3 of the accidents that lead to deaths and serious injuries occur because there's a lot of people very busy trying their best on main arterial roads, run into each other. And the logic is, if they were driving slower at the time, it'd be we sort of can't avoid that easily. The logic is, if the best thing to do is make them drive slower. So I understand that. I guess one question that might remain is, an arterial road, you think about Gillies Ave, you think about Green Lane, East and West, you think about Great South Road. You don't really think about Woodside Road in Mount Eden or Canterbury Place in Parnell. Is it? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but do we know that these particular roads are dangerous?
David, one of the other facts I should have shared, and I'll share now, is interestingly enough, 61% of death and serious injury crashes that happen on our roads happen on roads where there is no prior accident history. 61%. So that's not far off 2/3 again. So, in terms of your question, when you think of those roads, you almost assume that they are safe, but you take the other facts that I've just shared together with that one, and what it says is there's a high probability or chance that you could end up in a serious crash that either results in someone losing their life or being seriously injured on a road where previously there hasn't been an accident history, and at a time other than what most of us would intuitively think.
Can we say something about type of road, though? Arterial versus kind of, leafy suburban street?
Yeah, well, I think what I would say about that is the speed limits that we propose are based on an assessment that looks, and it's assessment around what is safe and appropriate. From that, and I don't want to get into too much technical detail, but we do look at the form and function of every road. So in arriving at the speed limits we've proposed for Parnell and Mount Eden, we've looked at each and every one of those roads to understand its form, its function, the type of people that typically use that road, the accident history on those roads, and also the operating speed. So what are vehicles currently traveling at on those roads? When we do that technical assessment, that flushes out for us what we think the best proposed speed limit, which we consider to be safe and appropriate on a road, would be. So we do look at each road, its form, its function, its nature. And I guess that's why on the slide I was showing you, we're proposing on Dominion Road and Mount Eden Road 50k per hour as opposed to 30k per hour in a number of those residential roads, not busy arterials, residential, where you would like to think that kids can play in the streets, can walk safely to and from school, can hop on their bikes and make a journey down to the local dairy, etc.
Okay, quick rapid fire, because I'm mindful of you guys' time. We were originally going to do this for half an hour, but I knew that the conversation would flow on a bit. But very quickly, I wonder about compliance, because at some point people may just stop following the rules. And I know, having tried to drive at 30 around Merrill Drive or wherever when I dare to drive into the CBD, something I always regret immediately. Do we know much about whether people comply with 30k limits?
So, David, I think we've touched on the monitoring and evaluation that we're doing, and it doesn't just cover the number of deaths and serious injuries. It's covered compliance and what we're seeing in terms of behaviours. And what's been really, really heartening to see is that over time, is that many people are trying to do the right thing and are generally adjusting their travel speeds to the new speed limits. There's been one or two exceptions, not in the city centre, but more in the northwest of Auckland. But we are seeing positive efforts being made, and that is reflecting and coming through in some of those results we are seeing. I think your concerns about enforcement, we are generally concerned about that, but it is less not so much associated with the new speed limits. It's a bigger issue around police effort.
Okay, so you're positive about enforcement. And rapid fire, last one. I wonder, and this is one of the questions that's come up a few times that have been sent in by viewers, in terms of, I guess, what might be called cost-benefit analysis. And sometimes it's a sensitive topic because people say, well, surely, any speed reduction is justified if it saves just one life. But the truth is we don't think that way. Otherwise we'd make the speed limit 10 kilometres an hour everywhere, and we just don't do that. This will lead, I know one of the metrics and the objectives of AT is to get people around faster and, raise productivity so people can get to work and get to shop and do things they want to do more rapidly. This will make it longer or slower for people to get where they're going. How do you balance off that cost to people versus the objective of being safer, while accepting that, and I understand the official goal is zero by the government and so on, but while accepting that nothing will ever be 100% safe, whatever we do?
Rapid fire, David. Look, when at the start I talked about our obligation, and that was to look at both safe and appropriate, and take a balanced view, safe and appropriate being efficiency and effectiveness of the network, And it's a prescribed process from which we work through. On top of that, we've done a business case for this investment. If we want funding for these sorts of programs, we have to work through that to get the funding from Waka Kotahi. We follow the Treasury Better Business Case guidelines. The BCR for the Safe Speeds program is 11 to 1. So every dollar we invest, we get $11 worth of benefits. So that is both financial and economics, and takes into account everything that we can put a value on, and follows the guidelines, and it's independently validated.
So the short answer is you've weighed up the benefits of reducing deaths and serious injuries, and weighed that against taking longer to get places, and the conclusion is that it's actually the benefits are 11 times greater than the costs. Okay,
correct.
Well, that sounds pretty impressive. I've just had one last question that's come in on the screen, and then there's definitely be the last one, I promise, then we'll set you free. So another question from Justine. Can you please ask him who's responsible for the chaos that is the Manukau Great South Broadway intersection? Took away a turning bay from Great South Road into Manukau Road, also known as forcing you into the side streets around Dio, and the lights phasing has gone berserk, so huge queues every which way. Okay, and Russell says more 30-kilometre-an-hour zones and safe bike routes around schools would be great. I think I started reading that before I'd fully read it. I don't know if it's fair to put the specific light phasing of. It's a very big and important intersection, and it's got like 5 schools right next to it. So you can understand people be very concerned about it. I don't know if you can address that, but if you can in 30 seconds, please do.
I know the change, but I don't know the background to it. We're happy to come back and provide a written response, David. Or something
maybe
like
what we can do is Justine has presumably come through. If you haven't given us your details, please email mpepsom@parliament.govt.nz, and we will talk to the people at AT and try and get you something more specific. That was a bit unfair. Sorry, guy. In fact, there's that email on the ticker tape. Well, look, clearly this is going to be controversial based on some of the feedback and questions we've had, but I hope that we will be able to at least have generated much better understanding of why AT is doing it, partly the statutory requirements, partly the deaths and serious injuries, partly the cost and benefit analysis, which they say is actually 11 times the benefits versus the costs of having to drive slower. And hopefully, at least out of that, we can get a better idea of what is being done and what is being achieved, and also what the process is, which we know now is a whole lot of analysis of submissions people have made leading up to a decision by the AT board in August. I also just want to thank everybody who has come to watch this. Watching discussions of transport policy at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening is not everyone's idea of excitement, but if you've given us your time, we're very grateful, and I know that it is actually very important to a lot of people because they have a sense of place, and what happens right outside their home really matters to them. So thank you very much, Shane, Chief Executive of Auckland Transport, Andrew Allen, the Director of Service Delivery for Auckland Transport. We're very grateful for your time and for everybody who's joined us. And of course, as your local MP in Epsom, you're always very welcome to get in touch about this or any other issue. If you think I'm saying the wrong thing in Parliament, or you'd like help with a government department that's making your life difficult, then please get in touch at mpepsom@parliament.govt.nz. Come and see us at 27 Gillies Ave Broadway, Level 2, or call us on 522-7464. Always grateful for the opportunity to help people who live, work, do business, go to school in the Epsom electorate. That's enough from us. Thank you so much, Shane. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great night.